Have you ever wondered why some minds rise while others sink? Why shallow thinking collapses under real pressure while true depth stands unshaken? Today, we dive into why intellectual inertia ends. My pale exec's depth drowned out shallow depths in harmonious harmony, a story of mental evolution, powerful insights, and the quiet transformation that happens when depth replaces hesitation. So stay with me because this journey might be the turning point your mindset has been waiting for. And before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss the ideas that sharpen your thinking and upgrade your life. 1. The collapse of shallow certainty. Shallow thinking often feels quick and comfortable, but it collapses the moment real decisions demand layered understanding. It creates a false sense of progress while hiding the gaps that eventually expose themselves when pressure increases. My pale execs learned that certainty without clarity becomes a trap that limits growth rather than enabling it. Intellectual inertia thrives when shallow logic is repeated without questioning its core foundation. What appears simple becomes dangerous when relied upon too heavily. But depth forces confrontation with nuance and challenges that shallow minds avoid. Depth exposes the blind spots hidden under simple assumptions. It forces reflection instead of reaction. It dissolves ego and replaces it with insight. 2. Depth as a quiet force. Depth rarely announces itself. It moves quietly and steadily, reshaping understanding from within. My pale execs began realizing that the deeper they explored an idea, the more power they gained over it. Shallow thinkers usually mistake noise for intelligence, but depth teaches silence, patience, and clarity. It requires time, discipline, and self-awareness. It reveals connections invisible to the untrained mind. It grants the ability to anticipate outcomes before they happen. It transforms decision-making from reactive to strategic. It sharpens intuition through accumulated understanding. It turns uncertainty into opportunity. It strengthens the mental muscles needed for long-term growth. 3. When intellectual inertia breaks. Intellectual inertia is the resistance to mental growth, the habit of repeating what feels familiar even when it no longer works. My pale execs initially resisted deeper thinking because surface-level decisions felt faster and easier. But over time, failing patterns exposed themselves. Their shallow approaches no longer solved problems. They created new ones. Inertia broke the moment they confronted uncomfortable truths about their thinking. Growth began once assumptions were challenged instead of protected. They realized real progress requires mental friction. Depth became a necessity, not an option. Inertia ended because its foundation was built on repetition, while depth demanded renewal. 4. Harmony between ideas. Harmony doesn't come from forcing ideas. It comes from aligning them through deeper understanding. Shallow thinkers treat ideas like isolated pieces, but depth reveals their connections. My pale execs discovered that when ideas harmonize, decisions become clearer and more impactful. Harmony requires stepping back to see the bigger picture. It demands removing biases and personal ego. It forms when contradictions transform into complements. It brings stability to complex issues. It reduces confusion and increases coherence. It replaces intellectual noise with intellectual rhythm. It turns scattered thoughts into unified strategy. 5. The power of reflective thinking. Reflection is one of the greatest antidotes to intellectual stagnation. My pale execs learned that reflection reveals patterns hidden beneath daily tasks. It exposes mistakes without judgment and highlights strengths without arrogance. Reflection forces the mind to slow down long enough to understand its own direction. It transforms past experiences into future advantages. It builds internal wisdom without external pressure. It deepens self-awareness. It improves emotional clarity. It strengthens decision-making. It guides thinking away from impulse and toward insight. And ultimately, reflective thinking creates the conditions where shallow thought can no longer dominate because depth becomes the natural state of the mind. 6. The layers beneath every choice. Every decision has layers: personal, emotional, logical, and strategic. Shallow thinking sees only the top layer, but depth explores all of them. My pale execs realized that every choice carries unseen consequences. Depth allowed them to anticipate ripple effects and prepare for outcomes others couldn't see. It helped them understand motivations behind actions. It made their decisions more informed and grounded. It revealed long-term implications hidden beneath short-term wins. It highlighted risks others ignored. It gave them a sense of control over uncertainty. 7. The strength of intellectual humility. Humility is often misunderstood as weakness, but in truth, it is the foundation of deep thinking. My pale execs learned that humility opens the door to growth by admitting what they do not yet know. Shallow minds protect themselves through arrogance, but depth thrives on curiosity. Humility removes the fear of being wrong. It encourages exploration of new ideas. It allows for honest self-assessment. It strengthens collaboration. It builds trust. It creates space for learning. It breaks intellectual barriers. It replaces judgment with understanding. And as humility grew within them, shallow thinking began to dissolve because deep awareness demanded truth over ego. 8. When depth becomes leadership. Leadership is not about authority, it is about understanding. My pale execs transformed when depth shifted from a personal mindset to a leadership principle. They began making decisions with broader vision. They listened instead of dictated. They understood instead of assumed. They guided instead of controlled. Depth helped them anticipate challenges before they emerged. It allowed them to see potential in others. It gave them emotional stability. It made their influence authentic. It created an environment where shallow thinking could not survive because depth set the standard for everyone involved. 9. The harmony of thought and action. Thought without action is incomplete, and action without thought is dangerous. My pale execs realized that true power comes from balancing both. Depth allowed them to align their thinking with purposeful execution. They stopped reacting and started strategizing. Their actions became intentional and meaningful. Their decisions began producing stronger results. They identified opportunities hidden beneath surface distractions. They built habits that reinforced clarity. They took responsibility for outcomes instead of blaming circumstances. They moved with direction instead of guesswork. 10. The end of intellectual inertia. Inertia ends the moment a mind refuses to stay shallow. My pale execs reached this moment when they saw how depth elevated every part of their lives. They recognized that shallow thinking is easy but costly. They embraced discomfort as a signal for growth. They pursued clarity instead of shortcuts. They welcomed complexity instead of avoiding it. They stopped fearing depth and began seeking it. They built mental resilience. They turned reflection into a daily practice. They strengthened their thinking until it became unshakable. And in the end, intellectual inertia dissolved completely because depth replaced every shallow habit that once held them back. As we close this journey through why intellectual inertia ends, my pale execs depth drowned out shallow depths in harmonious harmony. Remember that true transformation begins the moment you choose depth over convenience, clarity over noise, and growth over repetition. And if today's breakdown opened a new perspective for you, then stay connected, because the next episode is going to take your thinking even further into the realm where insight becomes power. So make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment about the point that resonated with you most. Share this video with someone who needs to sharpen their thinking, and keep returning, because every week